I am presenting Union Gospel Presses Sunday School Lesson number 11, Sunday, November 16th, 2025. The lesson is entitled, Jesus Calms a Storm. Lesson text comes from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Related scriptures are Psalms 107, 23 through 32, Jonah 1 through 16, Matthew 8, 23 through 27, Luke 8:22 through 25, Acts 27:13 through 44. The place is Sea of Galilee. The time is between 26 and 30 AD. Today's lesson is one of the most popular events in the life of Christ. This account is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels. The miracle further explains God's omnipotence, showing that Jesus Christ has power over nature. As the Son of God, Jesus has power equal to the Father's. Today's aim, facts, to observe Jesus calming the storm. Principle, to understand that Jesus has power over nature. Application, to realize God is in control of every aspect of our lives. Illustrating the lesson, Jesus' disciples were afraid the storm would overtake them. Jesus was not afraid. He can calm any storm. Practical points. 1. Sometimes obeying Jesus will lead us into difficulty. Mark 4:35 through 37. 2. Jesus understands our needs so we can pray confidently. Verse 38. 3. When difficulty comes, sometimes we doubt God's goodness. But even when we only have a little faith, Jesus answers prayers. Verses 38 through 39. 4. Jesus has power that belongs to God alone and is fully God. Mark 4:39, John 8:58, Colossians 1:15 through 20. 5. Doubting God's goodness shows we lack true faith, even if we believe in his power. Mark 4:40. 6. God is to be feared. Mark 4:41, Deuteronomy 10:12, Ecclesiastes 12:13. Golden text. And they feared exceedingly and said one to another, what manner of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Mark 4:41. Today we have 4 lesson outlines. The first is the setting, Mark 4:35 through 36. The second is the storm, Mark 4:37 through 38. The third is Jesus' response, Mark 4:39 through 40. And the fourth is the disciples' response, Mark 4:41. Introduction. Over the last 2 weeks, we have seen God's overwhelming power. This week, we see Jesus display that same power to calm a violent storm and control the weather. Only God has the power to control the raging sea, and Jesus therefore demonstrated his divinity in this passage. And yet, he also grew tired and needed sleep, demonstrating his real humanity. In response to his demonstration of power, the disciples marveled and wondered, what manner of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Mark 4:41. One implication of this passage is that Jesus is able to deliver us from the troubles of our lives. No matter how fiercely the metaphorical storms of life may rage around us, he is all-powerful and able to deliver us easily. At the same time, however, that is not the main point of the story. The main point is Jesus' identity as truly God and truly man. Every one of us must answer the disciples' question, who is Jesus? The setting, Mark 4:35. And the same day when the even was come, he saith unto them, let us pass over unto the other side. Verse 36. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship, and there were also with him other little ships. After a long day of teaching, Jesus told the disciples to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Presumably, he did that in order to rest, as he did on other occasions with the disciples. Mark 6:30-32. The long day had been exhausting. As a human being, Jesus had real physical needs for food, water, and sleep. Matthew 4:2-21-18. So did the disciples. They needed a break. Tangentially, if even Jesus needed rest, why do some of us think that we don't? This passage comes immediately after a series of parables, Mark 4:1-34. Jesus had been teaching about the kingdom of God, and now he was about to demonstrate its power. It seems probable that these were some of the parables Jesus had told just before getting into the boat, or perhaps from the boat. Would the disciples prove to be rocky ground or rich soil? Verses 1-20. Had they understood the secret of the kingdom of God? Verse 11. And would they now see it grow? Verses 26-32. Sometimes when the crowd was thick and crushing, Jesus would get into a boat and put off a little from the shore. That way, he would not be tightly surrounded by people and could be more easily seen and heard by a greater number of people. From there, he would preach to the people. Luke 5:1-11. That may have been the case here. After a long day of preaching, Mark 4:1-34, and perhaps also performing miracles, he was tired and they headed for the other side of the sea. The remark in verse 36 that other boats were with him has no real bearing on this story, but it does have surprising importance for us. We never hear anything specific about the people who followed after Jesus and the apostles, what condition their boats were in, or even their names. They are not recorded interacting with Jesus during or after the storm. Although this may therefore seem like a wasted line, it is actually quite helpful for us, precisely because it has no real relevance to the story. If you were making up a carefully crafted myth in the first century, 2 Peter 1:16, you would not throw in random irrelevant details like this. But we say this sort of thing in passing all the time during everyday conversation when telling a story. This throwaway line about an incidental detail is the mark of a true eyewitness account, not a legend. It provides internal evidence that someone who was a real eyewitness, almost certainly Peter, according to church history, recounted this story to Mark, and he recorded it faithfully for us. The Gospels present real historical events, not myths. The details that Jesus slept on a cushion and that he was specifically in the stern are similar to the mention of other boats. They do not deeply impact the narrative, but are marks of real eyewitness testimony. The fact that the disciples are often portrayed in a less than flattering way throughout all the Gospels is also a mark of authenticity. The disciples did not get into this storm because they disobeyed Jesus. He did not command them to go in one direction only for them to flee to the opposite way, as Jonah had centuries earlier. In fact, the disciples got into this storm precisely because they obeyed his command to cross over to the other side. Not all difficulties in life are the result of disobedience. In fact, some difficulties may come precisely because we obey God, but he is in control of even those difficult circumstances and has the power to bring us through them. When we experience hardships, we sometimes meticulously examine our lives to see whether we have sinned somehow and are being disciplined. That is not inappropriate because Sometimes we are being disciplined, but sometimes we are not. If we assume that every time someone has trouble they are experiencing God's discipline, we make the same mistake as Job's friends. Job's 4:1 through 32:1. Sometimes the difficulties we're experiencing are because of our obedience, not our disobedience. 1 Peter 3:17. Did Jesus supernaturally know this storm was coming when he told the disciples to get in the boat? We don't know, but it is very possible he did. If so, he led them directly and intentionally into the storm to further reveal who he is. The storm, verse 37. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, and so that it was now full. Verse 38. And he was in the hinder part of the ship asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? A great storm suddenly arose on the sea, shaking the boat and frightening even the most experienced sailors of the group. Although not all of Jesus's apostles were former fishermen, a good number of them were. These were not inexperienced men scared of a small wind and a little rain. Some of them had spent years on this very sea, yet they were frightened by the power of the storm. Even with modern technology, ships can be battered by powerful storms. Imagine how terrifying it would have been in a first century wooden vessel. Meanwhile, Jesus was fast asleep. This highlights Jesus' genuine humanity. He was completely exhausted. After a long day of preaching, he was worn out. He was not a tireless superhero. He truly experienced human weaknesses and he needed rest. It seems that the disciples waited for a while to wake him. They did not wake him when the clouds gathered. They did not wake him when the wind picked up and the waters got a little rough. Only once the waves were filling the boat did they wake him. They seemingly had not wanted to bother him before, but now they needed him. Perhaps before they thought that they could handle these things themselves, but now they recognized that they were truly desperate. How often do we do the same thing, trying to handle things ourselves and only coming to God as a last resort when we are truly desperate? When the disciples asked whether Jesus cared about them, they were questioning his character, not his power. They seemed to believe that he could do anything. That was the whole point of waking him up. After all, it is not clear what they expected Jesus to do, given their shock and fear when he responded, and perhaps it was just nervous panic. But they seemingly expected him to do something. Perhaps they thought he would call out to God in prayer. They would be delivered. Jesus' response, verse 39. And he arose and rebuked the winds and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Verse 40. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? When Jesus woke, he stood up and rebuked the wind and the sea died down immediately. It was not a gradual calming, but a dramatic and sudden stillness. He did not repeatedly pray for the Lord about the weather as Elijah had done, 1 Kings 18:41 through 46, nor did he act in response to a command from God as Moses had when parting the Red Sea, Exodus 14:16 through 21. That might have shown he was at least a true prophet, but this was far more dramatic. He did not perform some elaborate ceremony or ritual. He did not even pray. He simply commanded the storm and it instantly obeyed him. The sudden storm had been frightening, but the eerie calm was even more terrifying. Before, their fear had been for their lives, but now their fear was the reverent realization of Jesus' tremendous power. The man in the boat was far more powerful than the storm that had previously frightened them. No wonder they were terrified about this suddenly dawned on them with startling clarity. The disciples had seen Jesus miraculously heal many people and cast out demons already. Mark 1:29 through 34, 3:7 through 12. But this miracle had an epic scope to it. Jesus had the power that belonged to God alone. Only God could calm a storm. Psalms 107, 23 through 32. The apostles had woken Jesus up because they rightly believed he could do something, but he still rebuked them for having no faith. They might have thought, wait a minute, we do have faith. That's why we woke you up. They seemed to believe that he had the power to do something, but genuine faith involves more than just belief in Jesus' power. It also includes trust in his love. When we believe that God is all powerful but question God's care for us and doubt his love for us, we are not displaying true faith. We may believe that he has all the power in the world, but if we question his character, we are not showing genuine faith in him. We must have belief in both his power and his goodness. Faith also involves trusting God when he is seemingly doing nothing. Jesus had been asleep and the storm had been raging. Yet, if the disciples had deeply believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that he had a divine mission, and that God would not allow him to drown in a boat, they could have had confidence even though God appeared to be doing nothing. The faith-filled act may have still been for them to wake Jesus up and ask him to help them, but they would have asked him differently. Lest we be too hard on the disciples, we should remember that we can all too often question whether God really loves us when he allows difficulties in our lives. After calming the storm, Jesus asked the disciples why they were afraid. When we have faith and the power and the proper fear of God, we do not need to hear anyone or anything else. He rules over all creation. He commands storms, demons, disease, and death. We do not need to fear other people, Proverbs 29:25. We do not need to fear circumstances. If God is for us, who can be against us? Nothing can separate us from his love, Romans 8:31 through 39. The practical question is, what do we fear, God or circumstances? If we fear our circumstances, perhaps we need to spend more time reflecting on who God is, both the fact that he is all power and that he is love, 1 John 4:8. He has the power to solve all the problems in our lives, and he loves and cares for us. Also, note that Jesus calmed the storm and saved them even though he rebuked them for having no faith. Even when our faith is weak and mixed with fear, he hears us. Even when we have doubts, he hears us. Even when we think he does not care, he hears us and he acts. We do not need to waste time worrying whether our faith is strong enough before we come to him for help. He will not turn us away just because our faith is weak. When we call out to him, he will respond. The disciples respond, Mark 4:41. And they feared exceedingly and said one to another, what manner of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? The disciples' question in verse 41 is the main point of the story. Who was this who both needed sleep and could calm the storm with the word? While it is right to say that Jesus can calm the metaphorical storms in our lives, that that is not the main point of this passage. The focus is on Jesus and his identity. Perhaps Mark allowed the question to hang unanswered in the narrative for rhetorical effect. He provides us with clear evidence, but we must reach the obvious conclusion ourselves. Everyone must answer the question, who is Jesus? Mark does not ultimately leave that question unanswered. This story provides clear evidence of Jesus' identity. Indeed, all of Mark's gospel demonstrates that Jesus is the Son of God, 1:1, something that becomes increasingly clear throughout the book. From this specific story, we see clearly that Jesus is a real man who gets tired and needs to rest. He is fully and truly human with real needs and weaknesses. When Jesus took on humanity, he was made like us in every way, except that he never sinned, Hebrews 2:17. Jesus is also fully and truly God, able to command the winds and the waves. No one else possesses the power to control a storm. He did not need to plead with God to change the weather as the prophet Elijah had. He did not act in response to God's command as Moses had. He personally had the power to change the weather in an instant. He is not partly divine or part of the divine. He is completely God, Colossians 2:9. He is fully human and fully divine. As difficult as it is to comprehend how both these things can be true at once, we must affirm them both. The earliest heresies in the church usually denied that Jesus was truly human. Today, false teachers are more likely to acknowledge his humanity but question his divinity. No credible historian questions Jesus' existence as a historical figure, but many deny that he is who he claimed to be. But if Jesus had not been God, he would not have been capable of redeeming us. If he had not been man, he could not represent us before God. We must affirm both Jesus' humanity and his divinity. There is no one like him. This account is primarily about who Jesus is. Before we all allegorize this story and say that Jesus can provide us through the storms of our lives, which he can, we first need to answer the question the disciples asked, who is this? Who do you say that Jesus is? We must accept that he is fully God and fully man to accept him as he is. Do you tend to forget either Jesus' divinity or his humanity in your daily life? If we forgot his divinity, we would miss his authority and power. If we downplay his humanity, we will miss that he understands and emphasizes with our weakness. What effects might that have on your lives? Questions. 1. What happened immediately before this passage? 2. How did Jesus sometimes preach to crowds? 3. How is the detail that there were other boats helpful to us? 4. Why were the disciples caught in the storm? 5. What does Jesus falling asleep demonstrate? 6. Why did the disciples wake Jesus in the storm? 7. What did Jesus' calming of the storm demonstrate? 8. What 2 things does genuine faith involve? 9. How did Jesus respond to the disciples' lack of faith? 10. What is the main point of this story? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, November 16, 2025. Thank you for listening. Please remember to click the subscribe tab. God bless.